Gillian Balaban, and I am Senior Coordinator Governance Relations at GRI. Welcome to this meeting of the Global Sustainability Standards Board, known by its acronym the GSSB, held on 9 April 2024. This in-person meeting is being hosted from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Please note that all public GSSB meetings are being recorded, and you can find the audio recording on the GSSB meeting webpage, along with the high-level summaries of previous GSSB meetings. We'll be joined today by various members of GRI. So we will start with the roll call. Corey LaRue.
Present.
Thank you. Chilandra De Silva.
Present.
Thank you. Deborah Ng.
Present.
Galia Tisankova.
Present.
Gangacharan Sharma.
Present.
Ikazuma Okoroba.
Present.
Thank you. Jeff Robertson.
Present.
Jennifer Prinsing.
Present.
Laura Danakata.
Present.
Peter Colley.
Present.
Rebecca Coriat.
Present.
Tomu Machiba.
Present.
And GSSB Chair Carol Adams.
Present.
Thank you. GSSB members Anna Nefedova and Julia Genuardi will join shortly. I will now hand over to the Chair, Carol Adams, to open the meeting.
Thank you very much, Gillian, and welcome to everybody. Great to see you all here together again. And welcome to the GRI senior technical staff who have joined us today also. And a particularly special welcome to Bob Massey, GRI co-founder, who is going to give us some insights from the very beginning, really. We've been around nearly 30 years, so we'll hear some of his insights in a moment. Just while we're giving people the opportunity to join online to hear from Bob, I just wanted to report back briefly from the Supervisory Board meeting. The new Supervisory Board members were very engaged. They're very interested in our standards development work and our engagement work with regulators and standard setters. And they're keen to help out where they can. And prior to that meeting, I'd already involved one of them in a key meeting. And so the enthusiasm there was great. The Supervisory Board members noted the value to GRI reporters and report users, and the voluntary expert input to all our standards development work. And it's a real credit to all of those involved in GRI and the work that we do that we attract such experts to governance boards and to our technical committees. And we'll hear later on this morning from the Supervisory Board Chair and Vice Chair and the Chair of the Governance and Strategy Subcommittee in our private session on the proposed collaborative approach to developing strategy. Anna and I met with EFRAG along with Bastian, Laura and Abrielle from the GRI staff. We had a very constructive meeting regarding how that collaboration with EFRAG, in line with our MOU with them, will work in practice. And just one last thing from me, being from Australia, just a quick update on what's happening there. The mandatory climate-related financial reporting will begin on the 1st of January for the largest Australian companies. The Australian Accounting Standards Board Exposure Draft SR1 is likely to be approved in November. They've undertaken a very broad consultation, including, for example, and this is not something they've done with financial reporting, but they've spoken to farmers, miners, they've had a broad discussion with financial experts, sustainability experts, and noted, of course, a range of different opinions and views from that. They work very collaboratively with the New Zealand XRB, their external reporting board, and they also conducted a very broad consultation. Both these boards have taken into account national factors in developing their exposure drafts and standards. So, for example, in Australia, there is already legislation, the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme, which requires Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions reporting, which is slightly different from S2. It also requires disclosure on energy production and energy consumption. And in New Zealand, the XRB took into account the Maori values and culture. So both these standard setting bodies have taken a leading role. The Australian Accounting Standards Board summarises developments of global and jurisdictional standards setters for their board, and they include summaries of our meetings in the papers for their board. Alongside that, the Australian Government's Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water are updating their strategy for nature, and they've consulted on a priority list of impacts on nature to be addressed. And businesses are recognised as key enablers for change in delivering these strategies, which concern things like degradation of terrestrial and inland water, coastal ecosystems, impact of invasive species, minimising the impact of climate change on nature, and so on. And GRI standards provide that reporting for companies to demonstrate what impact they're having in these key priorities areas by this government department. So this is something that I was hoping would happen in some countries, that other government departments, other regulatory bodies of governments would start to look at the impacts on key environmental and social issues and recognise that companies and other organisations have a role to play in minimising those impacts. Now, I think I've said enough, and people who want to listen to Bob should now be online. Just to introduce Bob again, and I'll just let you. Everybody can read anything they want about you on the internet. You're there on Google. So Bob, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. It is an amazing experience to be involved in an experiment that ends up having such an incredible outcome. And yes, it's true, I was there at the very, very beginning. I'm going to tell you one or two quick stories about that. But really, what I want to emphasize is the GRI exists and it's doing its work because of all of you, because all the work by people who preceded you and the work that you're doing now, and by the understanding and the vision that you are carrying forward. And that is extremely exciting and I think absolutely critical, because if it had been an idea that was just appropriate to the moment, it would have had whatever minimal impact and then and faded away. Now, as you can tell already probably, I'm a shy person who doesn't usually speak up very much. You know, my problem is that I tend to get extremely excited about almost everything, and then all hell breaks loose in terms of the amount of time I speak. So I'm going to try to be rigorous about this. Let me start by offering a couple of observations about the context of where GRI was, and really it was in the sense of coming together of certain circumstances in the United States, and then coming together of my own background and how that early stage went forward. I think there's some lessons to be learned in how that actually took place. But very briefly, the notion that a company might make a set of commitments that would then need to be measured and disclosed was growing in strength in the 1970s and 1980s in the United States. And the issue that I was most familiar with was the anti-apartheid activism in the US. I was a student activist back in the 1970s, and I was very surrounded by people who had tremendous concern, and there was increasing calls on investors to do something and companies to do things. And so in bits and pieces, those investors in those companies agreed to take certain steps. But of course, agreeing to do something doesn't mean you have a record of them achieving anything. So there became an increasing idea that there needed to be some mechanism for measuring and disclosing. And some of you may remember that Arthur D. Little, one of the consulting firms at the time, took that job on, and they went into a great deal of investigation and had mixed success. I wrote an 800-page book on this, so if you're really, really dying to know all the details, or if you're looking for some mechanism to increase the strength of your biceps, I do urge you to get this very heavy book and see if it would serve one of those purposes. But out of that grew other interesting developments. In the late 1980s, there was a brilliant woman named Joan Bavaria, who was the head of a small $2 billion investment company. And Joan was extremely concerned about climate issues and environmental issues. And she wondered if it could be, those techniques could be brought into the environmental era. And she, and also the first President Bush was elected, George H.W. Bush, and he was telling everybody he was going to be as green as a grape. And nobody believed him, at least in my opinion. By the way, this first part of the story is very much told from my perspective about America. I realize there's many, many other things that were happening, so I'm just giving you the American context as I experienced it. Anyway, so that led to a discussion of, well, what would we ask the company to do if it wanted to take structural, make steps around this? And we came up with a list of 10 principles. They're originally known as the Valdez principles because also at the same time, the Exxon Valdez oil tanker crashed in Prince William Sound and released 11 million gallons of crude oil into that pristine environment, which that was devastating for the local community and also for the environment there. So we got going, and originally Valdez principles, and the company said we don't want to be involved in something named after a disaster, which is supposed to be swords, and some series principles. And series principles have a lot of different things, including the idea that this should be a board-level issue. There should be an environmentalist on the board. And you read them now and you see how earnest they were and how still very appropriate they were. They were read as, by many people, as, you know, a communist dictator overtaking capitalism. And so there was a lot of concern. But eventually a certain number of companies saw the value of it, and the whole notion of how are we going to measure and disclose environmental performance across that range of stuff became operative. Okay, so I became, now here's where my story comes in. So I'm a very odd duck. I was born in 1956. I experienced physical problems through, I was born with severe hemophilia, which causes joint bleedings, and couldn't walk for much of my childhood. Eventually, the medications improved, and I did walk for almost 50 years, and I've sort of come full circle, losing mobility in my left leg. But what was strange for me is that when I was walking, I looked like your standard privileged American white guy, and went to elite schools. And then when I couldn't walk, I was suddenly entered a new category of scary disability person that we don't know how to talk to. And so that led me to reflect a lot on people's experience about being excluded. And I sort of passed in and out of that world. And I also had to do my own confrontation with the absurd government rules and hospital rules and things that were designed for able-bodied people and that didn't really work. So this notion that we needed to continue to improve in order to accommodate people who had different challenges was very much built into me and made me a kind of activist. So I was a student activist, then I went to actually to divinity school. My first thought was that I wanted to be of service in the Anglican Church, the Christian church in the US, known as the Episcopal Church. But I was interested in economics and corporate power and so forth, so eventually I went to Harvard Business School, and I taught for a number of years. My focus was always on what was the role of institutional investors in helping to improve capitalism and alter capitalism. And then it all kind of came together with me teaching and Joan looking around for an executive director. We came together, and she was a great, great visionary. I mean, we lost a huge force for good when she died of cancer at about 62. Okay, so we get to series, and what is one of the first problems in 1996 is that a lot of people are starting to ask questions about environmental reporting, but the way they were doing it is a company would get together with, an NGO would get together with a company and work out something that they proposed, and there were a proliferation of somewhat competitive ideas. And I used to joke that at that point, every company had its own pet NGO, and every NGO had its own pet company, and they were not interested in figuring out what might be in common. This is human nature, it can sometimes be very defensive. We eventually got over that by inviting people to come together and to figure out what might be in common. And I could go through some of those things, but some of the features that led GRI to being successful, first of all, I said that this would be a collaborative effort, and that if it were successful, Ceres would spin it off. And I said, so you don't have to worry that you're contributing to a secret plan for Ceres world domination. I mean, so it was an act I like to think and hope of generosity and collaborative commitment, and that worked. And eventually it took 2 years to go from an idea to something that had substance. But the key element of that was that we made it clear that this was an ongoing experiment in innovation. We were very aware that accounting itself had been through major transformations as new problems created new conceptual challenges and thus required new frameworks over the previous 100 years, and we thought this should be done again. And a key thing that people often forget is that that was also the time when the internet appeared. So many groups that thought this was a bad idea dismissed it because they said you can never get an international process to move along unless you have 10 times the money, 100 times the money, and 10 times the time. But because we had so many devoted, hardworking, experienced, and committed folks involved in it, and because we could get exposure drafts to each other really quickly, and because email was invented just about then, suddenly we experienced the extraordinary benefits of being able to assemble a genuinely international community, not on Zoom yet, we couldn't see each other, but we could write to each other. And that propagated the thing very quickly. So I'm going to start to wrap up now, but just where we are now is, of course, we've moved a lot. We have solved certain numbers of the operational problems and the sort of conceptual problems, but people do keep asking, well, why are we doing this? What is the purpose of having this? And so here's where I hope you'll permit the historian in me and the sort of dramatic world thinker to share why I believe this is absolutely critical. In fact, I can think of very few things that are as important as the work that you're doing and GRI is doing. And I would put it this way. The world has, human beings have become increasingly powerful, and there are more of us, and we have more thoughts, and we're pursuing more things. And that power is now causing direct dangers to human existence and to planetary health. And so we, from my perspective, face an evolutionary test. Are we, as human beings, going to be able to master this extreme complexity and to be able to choose pathways that will allow us to understand things, understand those complexities, understand those interdependencies at a level of sophistication far greater than what our frameworks allow us to do now? Are we going to be able to understand the now very severe limitations of some of our frameworks? For example, financial accounting. I trained in financial accounting, but it is no longer completely fit for purpose. So are we going to make this transition? I am encouraged by the fact that not only do we have so many people who recognize the need to do this, but we also have new technologies of communications and computation that allow us to take on legacies of complexity that previous generations could not do, and they simplified everything because the math was hard and the data was scarce and so forth. And in those simplifications, they made a lot of mistakes. They had to do something and they made mistakes. So now we have all of those technologies, we have all these intelligent people, we have the absolute urgency of the problem, we have new technologies such as AI, where the jury is out as to whether it will contribute something significant. But in my view, I think we have the pieces that will allow us to think things through, communicate, come to agreement, develop the capacity to handle that extreme complexity of data, and hopefully pass the evolutionary test so that those of the next generation, have new tools and they are more successful. So just to wrap up, one part of me is frustrated and even a little bit angry that humanity was so slow and that there are so many people committed to maintaining and supporting systems that were clearly starting to fall apart, but it was too problematic to let them go. It was too difficult to say, no, this isn't working. I organized the first big meeting on climate change in Boston in April '92, and I was shocked that I thought it was going to take 10 years. So on the one hand, I'm frustrated that all that progress and still not enough speed. On the other hand, I look around a room like this and other rooms I've been privileged to be admitted to, and I do see we have the pieces necessary to make progress if we have the will, and if we have the urgency, and if we have the inner strength and the ability to collaborate. So that's really what I bring to you today. We are talking about rethinking, or the phrase I've been using, rewiring the source code of capitalism. That could hardly be a more profound and urgent challenge than doing that. And whether that is a truly expansive rethink where we end up with a system we feel we're going to give a new name to, or whether it's a series of strategic tweaks that allow us to avoid the worst and to pursue the best, I don't know. That's a decision that can only be made collectively by people like you, very specifically right here, but also in other organizations of goodwill and so forth. So I am grateful to you, and I hope to be a resource to you if that is something you would like in the future, just available. And I'm also, since I don't really know any of you, I'm hoping that each of us can take some time and I can start to build that awareness. But thank you again for the invitation. And Carol, that was about 2 minutes too long, but I did my best.
That was fantastic, Bob, a great call and a great reason for us to continue our important work. Thank you. I'm going to ask each GSSB member now to say a little bit about what's important in either their work with respect to sustainability reporting, their geographical area, or their stakeholder constituency. We have about 3 minutes each. Jeff is going to wave at you if you take too long. And I would ask that you say your name before you start speaking so that I don't need to interrupt you once you've started, so that people know who's talking online. Thank you. And if I could ask Jeff to start, and we'll then go around the room this way. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks Carol. So a couple updates from the Canadian side. So the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board is the Canadian implementation body for the IFRS S1 and S2 standards, and they have released their draft kind of consultations. There aren't too many earth-shaking changes they've proposed. It's mostly a bit more relief, a bit of an extension on when reporting under the Canadian versions of S1 and S2 are required. So I've got a couple of notes here, just a reminder, but essentially they extend the deadline for S1 and S2 by 1 year. Similarly, for any comparative information across risks and opportunities, that's also been extended by 1 year in this proposed consultation. I think the consultation period is 3 months. And also for relief of disclosures beyond climate. So that'll be pushed out till reporting period 2027. So good amount of time for organizations to continue to prepare for those disclosure requirements. And another, just in my time here, another quick update is one of our financial regulators, the Office of the Superintendent for Financial Institutions. They are taking a slightly different approach, and for our major kind of systemically important banks, they will be required to report under S2 for this year, basically calendar year, if the fiscal year starts in 2024. And they also have a climate risk disclosure form that they've developed to try and bring some standardization to that information for financial institutions. So a bit of more urgency on the financial institution side, and a bit perhaps less urgency as far as S1 and S2 implementation for the rest of the economy. So I hope that was less than 3 minutes, and I'll pass it over to Galia.
Thank you. It was very inspirational for becoming a corporation. In Europe, I think everybody knows about the part of acronyms, all this difficult to pronunciate stuff, CSRD, SRS, EU, DDD, EUDR, stuff. So for me, as a participant from the business, it's very difficult to understand how we will shift from GRI, because we are very familiar, we are making progress because of the GRI for many years in our organization, not only at corporate level, but also the local countries and subsidiaries that we have, to shift to CSRD, because first the approach should be different, second, we don't know what will be the local transposition, because every country has freedom, because it's a directive, not a regulation, to transpose in a different way, which means huge burden to local staff. Instead of maturing in what they are doing in the GRI, and it's the business and the priorities to go better and better, this is a little challenging for me, and I really don't know how to do it, because we need to comply this year between 24 and 25.
Right.
Sorry, Ellie, can you just talk up just a little? Can you speak up a little? No, yeah, no, that's fine, but it's just a little low on YouTube. Just talk a bit more.
So this is, I will repeat again, the challenge is the local transposition of the CSRD, GSSB, and all the other directives, and how our local subsidiaries will adapt. Because we've got a parent company, we have capability at the corporate level, and at the local level we have GRI capability. So now we need to shift, and this is what is bothering me. And also less than 3 minutes.
No problem.
My name is Idazuma Koroba. I represent the business enterprise, and I'm from Dangote Cement PLC. My major update, I think, in businesses across Africa is that there's a growing awareness on sustainability, and while we have some of the regulatory standards like the IFRS S1 and S2 coming on board, we have more businesses asking questions about how are we going to start this journey when we haven't even embarked on the journey, the voluntary sustainability reporting. So I hear you a lot. You're asking how we're going to set up our sustainability units. Lots of businesses are trying to set up sustainability units, hiring chief sustainability officers. And I guess the major point I would like to make to such businesses is that it's important for you to start from unknown to unknown, adopt a baseline, pay attention to the exposure drafts, participate in the consultative meetings for whatever standard is coming up, because we do have our context. And also the question about the cost of sustainability reporting is becoming something that businesses are worried about, and that also makes another case why the GRI provides a good baseline where your in-house staff, you can build that capacity before thinking about outsourcing sustainability. African issues are very contextual, and my advice would always be for the business enterprise to first empower the in-house who understand the business, the sector, the industry, and GRI provides that multi-stakeholder perspective really that most African businesses need to begin that journey before moving into the more regulatory ones which are emerging. And so also SMEs and NGOs always asking about how does this matter to us in Africa. SMEs contribute about 50% of the GDP, create jobs for about 60% of the population. So there's always a question about how the sustainability reporting is going to impact SMEs. And then again, GRI standards for me provides that kind of framework that even NGOs adopt the standards, and it is it's very relevant for long-term value creation rather than thinking about immediate access to capital, to funding. There is the long-term value creation for multiple stakeholders, sort of like a compass for the SMEs and the NGOs. Then perhaps the third thing in Africa that is very key is the double materiality principle, and I think a lot of businesses are just getting to understand that it's not just about box ticking or about meeting requirements, but it really is about, you know, the opportunities for your business to learn and to grow, and I think that sums up the key issues for sustainability in the African business context.
Awesome.
Thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Lorena Carta and I am a representative of the Labour constituency at the GSSB. I've been a member since 2019 with Peter Colley, my esteemed colleague here. I'm a lawyer. I work for the ITUC, International Trading Confederation, which is based in Brussels, but I'm currently based in Canada, as you can see from my tag here. The ITUC represents 200 million workers in the world in 168 countries. And let's just say, to keep the breakfast analogy, that our bread and butter is freedom of association, collective bargaining, social dialogue, and overall the promotion of workers' participation in labour matters, all labour matters, which go from enterprise level to national level, obviously. So, in terms of the key issues that the labour movement faces, with respect to sustainability reporting, I'm sure my colleague will talk about double materiality, which is key to us, but I think I'll leave him to talk about that in more details. But more generally, I think the ITUC is involved in promoting sustainability reporting. And one of the key issues that we see is the lack of recognition of the social issues, in particular along the global supply chains. Sometimes ESG only means EG, the S is omitted, so social issues are overlooked very often in these processes, as if respect for human rights and respect for workers' rights just stop at the enterprise gate. So this is something that we try and confront head on in our work. Another issue that we see often is the lack of integration of comprehensive sustainability strategy throughout company operations, which leads to discrepancies between what is reported and what is happening in practice. So we see a movement towards mandatory disclosures, and this is certainly a positive step here, which will push companies to comply more with their obligations. However, transparency and accountability remain the sole responsibility of the companies, and this requires a shift in how companies strategize on that regard. Obviously, that shift requires the full participation and integration of workers and their representatives in the overall sustainability strategy. And as Robert Massey just mentioned, our current frameworks are obsolete, especially in the face of the challenges that the world faces, that humanity faces, and indeed, to rewire the source code of capitalism, we will need a shift of paradigm, and we will need also to include more the voice of workers in this process. I think that was my first introductory note for this.
Hi, I'm Sunil Silva. Just a quick update on the context from Sri Lankan point of view. IFRS has been in debate with the ICS, or the Institute of Chartered Accountants Sri Lanka, which is the main body that sets the standards. From the deliberations, what it seems is that there will be it should get adopted as a Sri Lankan standard within the year or towards the latter part of the year. But it probably will not be mandatory. It will probably be a completely voluntary thing. So So that's where, in terms of our forest implementations, we understand. It's a bit early to give any definitive answers yet, but the implementation is still ongoing. I think GRI South Asia has been working very closely with Colombo Stock Exchange, so there's a lot of emphasis that Colombo Stock Exchange has issued guidelines, which is completely based on GRI standards, on how companies should adopt non-financial reporting, on sustainable reporting within annual reports. Significantly, early this year, Sri Lanka adopted, the government of Sri Lanka actually, created the Sustainable Development Council, which in my mind, I think is significant because all this time it had been more of a voluntary type of adoption by either the Colombo Stock Exchange or by Chartered Sri Lanka. But here you are actually having the government of Sri Lanka placing a Director General in charge to make businesses in Sri Lanka what they call ISBs, or inclusive and sustainable businesses. So I was invited to participate in this strategy co-creation, and I actually requested Aditi to join me as well. So she flew down, and we both met with the Sustainable Development Council and those other participants as well. And what we tried to provide them was with a framework as to what a company who hasn't heard of sustainability so far, a small and medium enterprise, even a large private enterprise, basically go through the motions of the process of going through materiality process, identifying KPIs, target setting, doing initiatives, and then final reporting. So that's something we proposed to them, and I think just today they had actually the Ministry of Industry and Center, Precision of thanking them for them and looking for more collaboration with GRI organizing today. So yeah, I think with those three elements of STC and Chartered Accountants and the CSC, technically is covering the corporate part of Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom.
Hi. Japan side is also similar development. In Japan is also financial standards. It's just accounting body, or it's just issued a Japanese standard equivalent to the Japanese standard equivalent to the ISSB and S1 and S2, which is quite similar to the ISSB ones. But its application limited to the certain the size of the company, and kind of Japan is a bit of lagging behind other countries in terms of application, but also we are having the standards in line with the international standards for now. And I see that people more concerned about both ISSB and also European regulations, CSRD, DSRs, and which probably applied for the most of Japanese big companies from 2028. So they are looking at both development very much, and one of the things about requirements for the digital reporting, and which is required by the ESRS, and so it's now development of also like Gaia X and Catena X development and digital passport. So it's like more supply chain data will be kind of digitized and being shared and throughout the value chain. So people wish to know how the sustainability reporting and fit in this picture, and which I'm also working for the digital solutions vendor. So it's like somehow I wish to contribute on how digital kind of landscape coming into the development of the GRI standards in the future. But also, like pretty much Japanese company looking at these new Japanese regulations and also European regulations, and wondering where the GRI stands for. And so it's like I wish to discuss together about the collaborative framework and how GRI can be developed to help people's understanding and also using the different standards together. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Correa, representative of the investment institution from the UK region. Thank you, Robert, for your very inspirational speech. I recently spent 3 months in a wheelchair, so I completely understand the comments you made about changing your angle. From an investor perspective, there's a few challenges. I think the first one is that as investors, we're expected to know everything that every company we hold is doing from every ESG angle. And even the minutest small issue or problem that occurs, we need to know immediately and we need to take action. So we have sort of this push and this trend from civil society sometimes asking us divest because a small event happened in a far-flung location. And we also as investors need to think about our clients who are with us because they expect returns. And also consider that sometimes divesting is not the best option, even if the issue may be significantly serious. Because when you divest, you kind of outsource a problem and you don't know who you are sourcing it to. So that's one item. And then the second sort of reflection I would like to share with the group is that as legislation is becoming more granular, it's becoming more detailed, more even overwhelming, because it's legislation overload. On our side as well, we need the companies where we invest to provide the best and clearest reporting. And that is because we need the metrics and the data to be consistent, year-on-year basis, but also across companies and across geographies. Otherwise, we cannot integrate that into our assessment methods and then come up with a sustainability or ESG profile for a company. So while we understand how difficult that is for companies to report clearly and consistently, it's the basis that we investors need to make investment decisions that hopefully respect and uphold ESG and sustainability considerations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob, for sharing your perspectives. It's incredible, and we're so sorry we haven't moved faster in all these years. I'm continually frustrated. I started in 2009 doing this, and I feel it's been a long time, but it does take time. And I represent the investor constituency as well with my colleague Rebecca. So I think all the challenges she laid out, we deal with. So I just want to bring some additional perspectives to what she said. Before I joined the asset management side, I was with the Canadian pension plan. I'm on the investment side, so coming at it from an asset owner perspective, I think it was still difficult, whether you're on the asset management side, the asset owner side, we are all measured on one thing, which is financial return. And I think it's always a tension between the short term, there's always risks that are coming up in the short term. They're not necessarily sustainability related unless you're at an extreme point in sustainability. And so we find we're dealing with a lot of the short-term noise for the sake of the long-term value creation. And even within a pension plan, it is difficult to strike that balance. The other challenge a lot is the stakeholders. You have the minority of stakeholders that see one event and they ask you to divest. They do not want you to engage with the company. They do not care about improvements. And then you have, I would say, whether it's the teachers of a province of Ontario or our broad clients, many of them don't care. And that's the sad truth. Part of it is, we need to listen to our constituents, which are our clients, which are our members, and a lot of times they don't think about these things. They don't think about the long term as well. They're sort of thinking about, well, what's my return the next year, or if we have a bad year, we hear about it. So I think it's super important to rewire capitalism. She said, I wrote that down several times because I think that's really, as an investor, we need to have our voice there because we need to be able to help shift capital, rewire capital. And that's my long-term goal in trying to be part of these groups and to help push standards for reporting. So hopefully we will get there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peter Colley from the Labor constituency in Australia, though I represent global unions on the GSSB. My colleague Loredana has already given the international perspective on labour concerns around sustainability reporting issues, and Carol Adams has given a report that's about actual nuts and bolts progress around sustainability reporting mechanisms in Australia. So I'll try and focus elsewhere. Carol is of course correct that the ISSB is making waves in Australia and is progressing its implementation. But I would caution here that it's ever only a part of the picture, not the entire picture. I remember it's only a few years ago that superannuation pension funds in Australia were saying that SASB reporting was going to be the be-all and the end-all, and that hasn't happened. Australia is not suffering the anti-ESG backlash that has occurred in the United States, but some of that has always been in Australia, especially regarding director accountability for ESG issues. It should be said that most multinationals either operating in Australia or headquartered in Australia will be required to report under the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. The Australian regulator for consumer issues is taking more aggressive action around greenwashing claims by companies with respect to their products and services. The Australian regulator for investors is still low-key by comparison, but there have been actions taken regarding claims by funds management firms regarding the ESG credentials of their funds, and more of that is expected. More of that enforcement action is expected. Like Loredana said, the S in ESG is still the poor cousin. It's progressing, but it's still the poor cousin. And the unions are concerned to obviously achieve greater prominence for human rights, including labour rights. What is noticeable recently in Australia is that unions are pressing their pension funds in Australia to pay more attention to the labour rights aspects of their foreign investments. All Australian pension funds invest substantially in other countries as part of their diversified strategy. Interestingly, at the moment, the greatest action is taking place with respect to Australian pension funds investing in US businesses about whether they are applying their ESG policies around labour rights issues in the United States. So that's an interesting development, and it would be good to see a lot more of that with respect to Australian pension funds investments in the rest of the world. I think I've said the Australian superannuation stroke pension fund pool was a very small country, barely making the G20. I think we've got the fourth largest superannuation and pension fund pool in the world, so it is a significant institutional investment, and we need to make sure that ESG reporting, sustainability reporting and implementation occurs strongly. Thank you.
Hi everyone, so I'm Cordy LaRue. I'm based in South Africa. I represent the mediating constituency. I'm an independent consultant. I work both locally and internationally, so I'll try to give you some perspectives from both of those. From a South African perspective, thank you Bob also for giving us the big picture again. I think it really positions us well for just thinking about why we are here and why we do what we do. But I think, specifically in South Africa, we were on the one hand privileged and on the other hand fortunate to be kind of at the forefront of a lot of these developments at the very early days of sustainability reporting, but we had the privilege of, companies that were first movers in the space. So sustainability reporting was somewhat of a standard practice for many organizations even before it became formalized, but I think GRI also played a big role in that and has done a lot to help promote kind of the quality of reporting that was happening. In the South African context, historically speaking, we were laggards in terms of environmental reporting, despite the depth of the mining industry there. Most of the issues were driven from a social perspective rather than environment. We still find today that often the social issues outweigh consideration of environmental issues. So I think that balance is a difficult one to strike in the African context as well as in the developing context. Zuma, you also referred to the African context and it being quite specific. I think every country has its contexts and its challenges, and that's something to balance. In terms of recent developments in the local context, sustainability reporting has been somewhat mandated for quite some time. I say somewhat because it's been incorporated in various forms. A lot of it has been driven from the stock exchange perspective and particularly also through the King Codes on corporate governance, which brought the sustainability reporting conversation into the boardroom probably about 15 to 20 years ago already. Governance also has become quite a hot topic, in the investment space. Also, you see a premium being paid for good governance, and sustainability forms a big part of that. From a legislative perspective, the sustainability reporting has been encouraged. The existence of social and ethics committees or subcommittee is now mandatory, and part of the regulations around what they have to report includes reporting against the principles of the Global Compact, not necessarily becoming a member, but just having those principles in place. From a JSE perspective, the big change with King 4 in 2016 was the advent of integrated reporting. So we find that dominates reporting in South Africa at the moment, but also positions our companies well to be open to double materiality. The King Codes are very much stakeholder focused, so our companies tend to naturally veer towards that, which makes, on the one hand, focusing on investing needs a little bit of a challenge, but also positions them well to work on double materiality. In terms of international work, in terms of ISSB, let me just touch on that very quickly. IFRS accounting is mandatory in South Africa, and we also see a big drive for ISSB reporting to become mandatory. That will require legislative changes, and we have seen the company's office.
Sorry, just a time check.
Okay, I'll pause that.
Thanks.
The Companies Act review is ongoing, so unfortunately the stock exchange can't mandate anything until the legislation allows it. Just a very, very quick touch from an international perspective. I work with the Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative, which does a lot of work with stock exchanges in terms of providing guidance on sustainability reporting as well as training. So helping to rewire that source code that's the tagline for today. And I know GRI also has good interaction with the SSE. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. Ganga Sri Sharma from India, part of international consultant and verifier, give me the privilege to get an overview not in India but in the countries like Middle East, Africa, Turkey, for example. Let's start with India. If I just recap in last few months since I given the last update, there are some positive movement. The stock exchange, the government authorities start taking it more seriously. At least disclosure is getting more attention. There are few isolated incidents when there was a greenwashing claim was denied by some civil society organizations, So it's a good move. As Bob said, the human beings are getting more powerful, through technology, and that's a good thing. Another trend, what we can see that BRSR, which is more of a local instrument for reporting, are creating some good impact. For example, for certain size of companies, they want a mandatory disclosure about the supply chain. By 75% of spent value, you have to disclose what exactly you are doing. And I believe this is the first step in the right directions to bring to the table and make them hold accountable. Double materiality is another buzzword which most of the organizations, irrespective, they are understanding they are obligations or compulsion to do it. And so these are the trends. Another thing what we can discuss based on our discussion with the ministries and authorities, they wanted to link with the rating also, because at the end of the day, they look from the national point of view, the national interest. So they wanted a harmonizations between the reporting standards, rating standards, and probably Government of India with through mandated bodies might come with their own national scheme on rating and held accountability on rating agency as well, because we have some incident which of the national interest, some allegations. So these are some from the Indian point of view. All in all, we see as India is getting more attention as a emerging economy, whatever India is doing is also being referred by the other countries in the region. Let's go to the Middle East. If you see the type of leadership or the political situation there is a monarchy or kingdom, and they learn from each other quite fast. If you see Saudi Arabia started their vision document 2030, likewise some other countries like I was in Oman, they also come out their vision document like Bahrain, etc. And the vision document also have reference to the sustainable development. And by irrespective, what's the behind the reason, but they pick up the climate change as a top priority and they start believing this is the core of sustainable development. I think there's a great need to policy advocacy with those constituencies or leadership to make sure there's a fine balance between ES and G, because if you see human rights perspective in full Middle East is a key concern. But if you do the analysis on the materiality landscape, you'll find very few, it's not appropriate presentation of the material issues arising from the S pillar of the ESG. For example, in Oman, there is a ministry itself called Climate Affairs, there is a mandatory disclosure in Scope 1, Scope 2. So let's appreciate the momentum, I think, as a standard setting board, but it's also important for us to make sure the transition and alignment with other standards which are playing a vital role in the market is smooth. And for the reporting organizations, it doesn't pose any additional efforts, because at the end of the day, everything will be down to the cost. And competency at the reporting organization is still a big challenge. So these are some of the thoughts from an Indian, I would say, extended regional experience. Thank you.
Hello everyone, Jennifer Princing. I represent the business constituency from the US. My experience has been with the large multinationals. I guess the first update from the US is the SEC climate rules. As expected, were challenged immediately in court by a number of states. And I think last week, SEC announced there could be voluntary stay on implementation of that as the legal process works out. So that could be a year, could be much longer. And also depending on the election process in the US this year, which means that the attention as far as corporates in trying to prepare to comply with that has pulled back a bit, understandably. So where are the corporates? They're focusing on CSRD. And I think in my 15 years or so doing reporting, this feels like the biggest change as the C-suite starts to understand this is regulated rather than this is something that the sustainability team does on a voluntary basis using the GRI. Now this is something that is going to be regulated. And that means a lot of things. It means our finance teams, our controllerships are extremely engaged. It's, I think, in terms of the GRI and in terms of those of us who are understanding and advocating for sustainability reporting, it's good and bad. The attention is great. I'm all of a sudden hearing about all of the tools, all the investment and resource that we're going to need to be able to do this, which we've been needing for a long time, even to do our voluntary reporting. So I have a feeling we're going to be getting the more of the tools that I need to do better reporting. But on the other hand, I'm hearing a lot of language like we should be doing the minimum required reporting. And why have we been reporting all of these things when what we're going to be required may be narrower? So that has been a very big challenge. We're definitely kind of speaking very different languages in different pieces of the organization, so we're doing a lot of learning. I think the corporates are relying a lot on the interpretations of the large consultancies. So as the GRI is working to find our space and defend our position or what we're doing, those consultancies are probably a very good audience for us because the corporates are listening to them. Many of the corporates are doing their double materiality assessments using consultancies, and they're really getting a lot of their information directly from those groups. Other things that this kind of means as the companies are thinking about CSRD, you get a lot of risk discussion. So topics that we've talked about rather freely in the past, but now as they're being part of this impact risk assessment discussion, the transparency is narrowing a bit, I think, as it becomes a risk discussion, which is a different thing. So yeah, a lot of change, a lot of probably good change, and some challenges for us. Galia was very interested in your perspective that the concern about individual jurisdictions applying their own modifications to the CSRD. I don't hear a lot of that in the US discussion, that people are concerned about that or aware of it. So interesting to see or to hear how much we think that is likely or not. That's interesting.
Great.
Thank you very much, everybody. And what's really clear is that we need all of these different stakeholder constituencies that we represent here playing a role in this rewiring. The focus on double materiality. We need corporate leaders with the vision and the understanding to make these changes, not just focus on new compliance requirements, but really see the benefit of the broader reporting on impacts. And the whole of GRI has a role to play in this. We have the GRI Academy that's increasing skills and helping to deal with this complexity. But again, enough from me. I want to give the final word back to Bob Massey. Bob, you have 10 minutes to reflect on your reflections on our input here.
Well, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. And of course, I want to pause every one of you and ask a whole lot more questions. So I do hope that our meeting today is really the beginning of an ongoing exchange. I just have a couple things to say. First of all, I want to correct any impression that I might have left that I'm somehow impatient with what you have been doing. That is not true. I have seen very hard work, very timely work on the part of GSSB and other pieces of GRI. So I think you folks are a shining light of engagement and forward thinking. I was really referring to the way in which, and we should do a whole piece on social psychology, just how powerfully certain ideas can take a hold of the people who believe them, and how they maintain confidence in their utility long after, I think, other observers might say, this clearly isn't working very well. And people want to say, no, it is this. And I think that has as much as anything to do with just the raw amount of time commitment and identity that people have acquired from their participation in something, and anything that challenges what they're engaged with and challenges them in a very fun way. What have I done with my life? So cultivating a constant forward-looking spirit of creativity and cooperation and forward movement is a very healthy antidote to the natural human instinct to want to sort of enshrine certain approaches as being the be-all, end-all for a long period of time. I'm going to say a little bit more of that in a moment. One thing that I think is worth pondering, I was on the Integrated Reporting Commission for a couple of years and was very encouraged by that process. And one of the privileges of being part of that was 2 or 3 times I got invited to St. James Palace to hear, at the time, the Prince of Wales talk about his views. It was always a little tricky because you had these wonderful little meat sort of pies that were just at 7,000 degrees, they were so hot. And you had to balance this thing that was tilting on a small plate and trying to eat it in a dainty manner in the middle of the palace and meet all these posh people, and knowing that at any moment it could catapult straight onto your chest. But that didn't happen, but the fear remains with me as drama. But what the king said that I think is a really important simplification, he said the issue is whether sustainability is going to become a division of finance or whether finance is going to become a division of sustainability. Now, what does that mean? Well, certainly when I got involved in the area, capital markets or investors in general really couldn't identify a sustainability issue, term wasn't around, that had an impact on their financial cash flows or their asset value, whatever. They just wouldn't, these things aren't related at all. I think we've come a very long way so that the notion that sustainability in terms of systemic trends that contains large-scale risk, people generally accept that there is some potential danger to the overall financial position. In a sense, that's the whole essence of the ISSB, is trying to figure out what those are. And that's part of the thing that I think, well, we could have gotten there a little faster. But the idea that finance itself, so it's not, what happens now is sustainability is this great source of information, and boy, are we lucky to be able to use it now to make better strategic decisions in terms of our opportunities and our dangers. That's great, but that's only half of the story. The other half is how can the entire field of finance become an instrument to avoid damaging things further and playing a proactive role. Now, of course, you know of hundreds of efforts where people are trying to do that, direct capital into renewable energy or a million other things. But still, there is, if you're talking about where you are on the spectrum, there's still too much talk about how the goal is to include these sustainability insights into business decisions, rather than what are the different mechanisms that could really drive in every corner of finance sustainable advances or to avoid sustainable damage. Now, obviously highly complex, but it's not going to get addressed until we address it explicitly, and that's where there's a certain proliferation of things. Again, a really quick digression. One of the things that I'm trying to do right now is put together a meeting at Columbia University in New York City of 4 of the sort of, I refer to them as ecosystems of thought. Very, very simplified model, but basically financial materiality folks, impact materiality folks, by which I mean GRI, which I've been increasingly expressing as inventories of negative externalities, which I think when GRI was first going, the basic impulse is, could you please make a list of the things that investors and companies should look at that are not priced in to any prices and that are often ignored and yet which are important. So what would those be? So financial impact, then in the United States, as many of you know, there's an enormous preoccupation with the field of impact investing, which comes out of the VC world, of philanthropy, private equity, which is very powerful because it allows for 2 objective functions. It allows you to seek something other simply than the maximization of some financial value. But it also, you can't do that under current US fiduciary law, so we need to examine that. But we've got those 4 folks, and they're going to come and talk. Some leaders of that are going to come and talk in June. And the good news is that the senior people from some of America's biggest foundations are going to show up, and since those foundations have been putting money into impact investing, I'm going to make the best case I can that they should shift it into a broader domain. Okay, just one or two other things. One of the things that I think we need to be clear about, and I know you all know this, it's kind of scary to talk to you because you know so many pieces of this, is that when you use the term materiality, and that determine materiality so that we can have the efficient allocation of resources in capital markets, one of the things that we don't say is, and here I'm being a little polemical, part of what materiality says is, look, we've identified a whole bunch of issues which we now have officially decided are irrelevant. That's what immaterial means, is they're not relevant. So we can very explicitly take them and put them over here where we don't have to think about them in purchases and investment analysis. And so this is really problematic if you think of the capital markets as somehow being this magically efficient mechanism for decision making. Because if you're permitting the extraction, isolation, incarceration of certain forms of knowledge as being irrelevant, then you can get by with what we did in this world for about 30 years about not asking what the true cost of, let's say, fossil fuel investment would be. So in the same way that in the consumer market, you could end up paying completely artificial prices because the prices you're paying don't reflect the larger cost that is in fact embedded in that product. Even more true when you're talking about the capital markets, when you're saying, I'm going to consider whether to buy this or not, but I'm literally going to ignore this whole domain. And what's happening now through your work is that we're re-importing ideas and we're unclicking the immaterial button and suddenly we're making it material again, and that's causing all kinds of recognition that people find troubling and inconvenient and makes some people angry, but that's the essential thing. So I guess as I say, being polemical, it's not like we are introducing new information to an otherwise perfectly efficient market that's been doing its job beautifully. In fact, the market that I pay attention to has misdirected trillions of dollars, and we're now trying to correct that misdirection on the basis of introducing new information that's relevant not only to shareholders but to others. So, okay, so I just try to not be too smitten by the sort of ideological position that we're going from. We're tinkering with this wonderful system that barely needs any improvement. I tend to view it as a very damaging system that needs a lot of improvement. Okay, so just to finish, in the United States, what we're trying to do, what a lot of things going on. I'd love to talk about the ESG backlash. I'm working on a piece on that, but we can do that maybe over meal. But I'm trying to get the people from financial materiality and impact materiality and impact investing and to sit down at the same table and talk about, first of all, what they're doing, and because they're all very proud of what they're doing, as they should be, and then how they're going to build the bridges to the others, because there's been an inadequate conversation about that. And the work that you're doing here tends to push that conversation forward steadily, because actions that you take then have to be reacted to by others, and that's extremely, extremely important. So overall, I wish I had a transcript of everything you said, because the things that I didn't quite hear, didn't quite understand. But I'm so honored and so confident on the basis of what I'm hearing that partly when I go back to the United States, or I'm going to be in London next week, I'm just going to be, you'll probably hear it all the way. I'll be singing your praises and trying to get as many people to join me in singing it in harmony as I can. But you should be very proud of yourselves. And I would just say I and so many other people are counting on you to keep going in the direction that you were going in today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. And I hope you can feel rest assured that those of us here will continue to deal with this complexity and try and move people away from just thinking about what can be measured in dollar terms and look at what really matters. Thank you very much, Bob.